with this new Congress, what are some objectives that you think should be tackled? And obviously, Republicans have a slim majority there, so Democrats may have to play a role in getting some legislation through. So how do you think bipartisanship will happen in Washington?
Well, I think it started already, and this is the 119th Congress of the United States. On January 3rd, we actually took our oath of office, and the margin is extremely narrow. The American people generally get where they're going, and so they want to create a big middle, and the margin right now is 219 Republican to 215 Democrat, which tells us that we have to work across the aisle if we're going to be successful. And for me personally, one of my top priorities is helping our own people get ahead. Prices have gone up on so many things. Coming out of the pandemic, the United States, from a economic standpoint, is the most stable democracy in the world, the most stable republic in the world. Our inflation is less than other places, but it's far from perfect because of all of the movement of goods and people around the world, and where items are produced and how they get to our shelves. It would surprise people to know that 2/3 of our fruits are now imported. If an egg is hatched in, or an egg is produced in California and it comes here somehow, we have to transport it across that vast region. So for us to do better in this part of America, we have to work hard for a farm bill that allows agriculture in this region to flourish. And we have our work cut out for us. Most of the counties I represent are rural ones, but this past year we had major crop losses. When you have crop losses, and when you have world grain markets, for example, like Ukraine's grain not being able to be placed on the market at the same rate, prices are going to go up everywhere. And that is exactly what is happening. So I think one of the areas in which our region has to be very conscious is to respect our productive land, because most places in the world don't have it.
Yeah.
And I find it very troubling that some of our prime land has been built on. And God will never produce any more prime land. We have to take care of the land we have. And we have to respect it, and we have to move it toward the future. We have to make sure it's there for subsequent generations. And if you look at our region, when US 24 was built, which is one of our many, many, many projects to ease distribution in this region, when we built it from the Port of Toledo to the Indiana border, we caused very few off-ramps on that US 24. Why? If you look, it's surrounded by some of the best farmland in the world. To take an acre of that out of production is a sacrilege. Most people don't believe that, but I do, because we're not the last generation to populate this part of the United States of America and America. So we have to respect the land. And I think a lot of people took it for granted, and we can't. There's new technology coming on, for example, and I'll end with this. We have many companies like Nature Fresh, Mucci Systems, and traditional companies like Hanes, Ullman's, Chef's Garden that produce in this area. We're doing a lot of four-season production in covered facilities now, where we control everything. We control water, we control nutrients, we control picking, organic production. This is a new industry, and it's very efficient. And we have to think about new forms of agriculture here to meet the demands of a growing population. So this region needs more agricultural specialists. We need to copy and learn from the farmers who are being successful in a very competitive environment.
And you cover a bit of ground there. Obviously, the economy, that big issue that a lot of people were talking about this election. And one of the things President-elect Trump has proposed are tariffs on Mexico as well as Canada. And those are a couple of our largest trading partners. So what could be the impact of those tariffs? And obviously, Canada, not too far away from Northwest Ohio. Could that bring a ripple effect here?
Absolutely. And we have to be very careful. The president may be an expert in real estate purchase. I don't know, but he seems to own a lot of real estate. But when you start talking about tariffs, you have to negotiate those, because they can have an enormous impact on your country. If you raise tariffs on imports, and I'm all for making everything and growing everything we can in the United States. I think we've offshored far too much of our wealth. And that's been my repeated mantra for the last 42 years of service, that we have to wake up and make and grow what we need to support ourselves. We should not be dependent on imports. But where they come, they have a right to compete in a fair market. But if he puts a tariff up, the chances are, take fruit. 2/3 of fruit in this country is now imported. The prices are going to skyrocket. So we have to be very careful. Canada is our largest trading partner. The president always talks about the southern border, the southern border, the southern border. We have a northern border. It is 2/3 of our trade with Canada. She is our biggest trading partner, and we are interlinked. Is he going to make it harder for us to trade with Canada, where we even share our lake? Lake Erie is shared half with Canada because of where the international date line is. The automotive industry is anchored here. The steel industry is anchored here. The grain industry, you have companies like Mondelez Foods, Anderson's. You just can't say something that sounds good maybe on a soundbite, but in the end ends up hurting the very people you say you want to help. So it has to be done very carefully, and he can't do it without Congress. Congress will have to be involved in any major change like that.
And we've seen in this area just manufacturing come and go throughout time. And obviously economic policy plays a huge role in that. So in your time serving this district, what would you say have been the policies that were most effective in actually keeping jobs here as opposed to sending jobs overseas, which is something that you're opposed to?
Yes. Well, the most effective to sort of stop the bleeding has been for Congress to bring back literally billions of dollars to save GM Propulsion in Toledo, to save what is now Jeep Stellantis, and I hope we can bring it back to America under U.S. ownership, all right? All the investment we've made in the steel industry, one of our lodestar industries, the glass industry, just helping to bring funds, millions, tens of millions of dollars to bring new furnaces to Libby Glass, to try to modernize and reinvest in production, because our people here are being asked to compete against $1 and $2 an hour labor in other countries. And then the people that work in those places can't afford to buy what they're making. So there's great disparity between a first world country like the United States and third world nations, where Wall Street and big financiers have moved production. It isn't the workers in Toledo. It isn't the mayors in the region here or the smaller companies that have moved that production. It's the big money center banks. It's private equity funds, hedge funds, Wall Street investment houses that have moved investment abroad. Why? Because they can pay workers almost nothing, ship the products back here, and make more money for their shareholders. The workers here get displaced, and we have the kinds of pockets of factories that have been shut down all across the country, including here where heavy industry should flourish. We also have been investing heavily in research and to help companies like Cleveland Cliffs compete and become the rebirth of the steel industry in our country. Smaller companies like Parker Steel, Heitman Steel in this region, Materion with beryllium. We are trying to save what we have and help those companies improve their capacity to produce in the United States of America. And it has been a very heavy load.
And we've seen that it isn't just these companies that have to balance their checkbook. It's also the federal government, which has had to balance its checkbook. Obviously, running a deficit up every year for 20 years is going to eventually take a toll. So both sides have wanted spending cuts, but that still has not happened. It's still just an idea, just a concept. Could we actually see spending cuts in the future on the government's end? And what work will have to happen between both parties to ensure they happen?
Well, actually, the most important measure of how we are doing is the deficit as a percent of the
Correct.
gross domestic product. And under Joe Biden, for the first time since Bill Clinton, that number actually began to decline, which showed that though we're becoming wealthier as a country, it isn't happening as fast as it used to, but the deficit was actually less as a percent of GDP than before. That's good. Even the Wall Street Journal has to admit that. Now, we have to keep the economy growing and not create more poverty. We have to be able to balance the private side and the public side. And the president keeps talking about cutting trillions here, trillions there. Well, exactly what is it? What is he going to do in order to do that? And if he cuts certain things too much, you're going to find the economy not growing fast enough. And we are right now the safest place for other countries even to put their money, and other businesses, because we have the best record in the entire world despite the heavy debt that we are carrying. But whatever is done has to be done very carefully so that you keep the economy growing while you try to balance the budget. It won't happen in a year. It wasn't created in a year. But we can actually slowly begin to bring that down. And the most important way is for the economy to grow and for people who pay their taxes to pay their fair share. Because we have major, big, billion-dollar companies paying zero taxes. That's not fair. That's not fair to the working class, the middle class, the people who are working every day and paying their fair share of taxes. So there's a balance that has to be reached. I'm confident that we can work together on that, but it can't be a hemorrhage all at once. It's got to be slowly done and continue to grow the economy while you're reducing the deficit.
And what's complicated about the budget is the fact that it's hard to cut that much because the Defense Department, the largest government department, makes up a large chunk of that, and then you have health and you have Social Security. But the Defense Department, for the 7th year in a row, it's failed its audit, which is something that obviously raises questions, but they say they're making progress. So how are both of those things able to happen at the same time, where you fail the audit, but you're making progress?
Well, the Defense Department budget is the largest in the government of the United States. And if you look at the world we live in and U.S. defense responsibilities, we know we have to protect the homeland. We have here in our region the 180th Fighter Wing. Years ago it was more field practice. Today it is a major part of our defense and northern border security. It has taken millions of dollars for us to upgrade our facilities here, and we continue to do that. And the number of jets has increased, the number of pilots, the improvement to the base itself, its own security. And they provided a critical ingredient on what was called 9/11. And America was able to limit the damage to our country, as terrible as it was. But we know that we have new forms of enemies around the world. And we can't live on an island. We know that much of our prosperity is linked to that of other countries that share our political philosophy. And so we have Major Pacific Command, we have an Atlantic Command. We know that in the Middle East the situation is extremely complicated, has been for a long time, but we've managed to divorce ourselves from our dependence on their oil. That is a major achievement that has occurred in a little over a half a century. We are now producing more oil and gas in this country than ever in the history of our nation. We are even exporting some of it, though I'm not for exporting too much, because the generations after yours will also have to have different forms of energy for the country and for the world. And we have to look to a diversity of energy sources. We're developing those. Nuclear power, advanced nuclear is one of them, thermal and so forth. But we can't let any country get ahead of us in these technologies. And that's part of our defense role. Part of our role is to protect our interests on the seas, in the air, and on the land, and to protect the people of this country. We've lately seen certain types of terrorist activities that have occurred in our country. We know that our intelligence services have to be improved, and that we have to be able to stop these incidents faster. And we're learning, and we have to fund those activities. So there's a developing spider web of tyranny in the world. We can see it with China, Iran, and Russia cooperating against, for example, the Ukrainians, and them fighting for their freedom. Russia came and took their land. They've been free since 1991, 3 decades, and Russia came and invaded the country and is willing to go deeper into the country. We have to pay attention to that. Now we see North Korea moving soldiers into Russia. These are not democratic republics. These are tyrannies. And our country's own interests are actually tied to what happens in those places, because we can't let tyrants keep gobbling up land and saying it's okay. And we will find our own security threatened because of the trade we conduct around the world and the threats to our own assets and our allies around the world. The democracies of the world do not represent a majority of the world. And so our strength comes in union with them.
Is that something that Congress is going to have to pay closer attention to, ensuring accountability and where those dollars are going? Because obviously a lot of money is going to be spent at the end of the day, but tracking where each dollar does go.
Yes, and what we're finding, for example, in the area of nuclear submarines, which are critical to our security globally because they're movable. They can go anywhere. And they protect America 24/7, every day, every month, every year. And do not underestimate how important that is to us and to our own security. They protect our shores. They protect offshore, where we have had incursions, whether it be by air or by sea. We have a mobile asset, but right now we are probably $2 billion or more behind in our ability to finish a modernization of our nuclear fleet, which is very important to us, simply because we can't find the workers to do the work, nor the materials that are necessary. Again, we have to bring home production to this country. The tooling, the manufacturing, the engineering that is necessary, because those belong to America, not to anybody else. And we don't share that technology with anybody else. So we have to stand on our own 2 feet again, and to the extent that we have to cut in the defense budget, we have to be very careful about what it is we're cutting. So it will take serious review, and we can't leave America vulnerable at any point. In the area of drones, I would say that we are behind in terms of our ability to manage heavier payloads, and we need more young people to go into the sciences and to think about ways of using computer technology, cybersecurity. These are fields that are opening up that can give America additional security protection if we have the young people who are able to move into those professions. And we're seeing that here in Ohio because of Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. It's one of our major sources of training of young people and the production of new assets for the country. And Ohio has always been a state that has defended the flag and that has met our enemies both at home and abroad.
You mentioned some of the geopolitical situations that the U.S. is currently involved in, obviously Ukraine as well as the Middle East. And one of the concerns about the Middle East in particular, we've seen a lot of voices locally that are really concerned about the situation because obviously October 7th, Hamas attacks Israel, 1,200 people, according to the BBC, that died from that. And now we're at the place where over 46,000 Palestinians have been killed in this situation. So to those voices that are concerned about this and raising concerns, what would you have to say to them? Because they've been pretty consistent in communicating with you.
Well, what I would say is that the president that we just paid tribute to, President Jimmy Carter, was a great president. And one of the reasons he was a great president is he did something no one else had ever done. He made peace between Israel and Egypt. No one in their wildest dreams could have ever imagined that that could happen, that two bitter enemies could come together and finally, after years and years of diplomacy, find a solution. I was there the day that the peace treaty was signed at the White House in the late 1970s. I shall never forget it. 2 years later, Anwar Sadat was killed in Egypt by those who didn't agree with him, and inside of Israel, Shimon Peres was killed by his own citizens who didn't agree with him. I would say radical wings in both countries eliminated the voices for peace inside those nations that had driven Menachem Begin and Anwar Sadat to the table. There were voices for peace. There were voices for reconciliation. So I would look at the Carter model as a possible route going forward. Do we have the diplomats that can do that for us? I know President Biden tried very, very hard. Anthony Blinken tried very, very hard. But there's been a 2,000-year history of acrimony in that part of the world. I've seen it firsthand. I've traveled there many, many times. And I think this reordering now, where we see what just happened in Syria, Lebanon has just finally chosen its president and has selected General Aoun to head the country right now. They've been without a government for almost a year in Lebanon, the adjoining country of Lebanon. I think Jordan can be a constructive force for peace. But the Palestinian situation goes not just back to the 1940s, but long before that. And there has to be a homeland for the Palestinians, and there has to be a homeland for Israel. And I think one of the real difficulties is on the Israeli side. The politics of that country has resulted in sort of individuals who are very set in their ways and their views, and their supporters in that country set in their views, and they are not compromising. They're not of a compromising mind. The same is true with the Palestinian situation. The issue is, who is the leader? Who is it? And so you can't negotiate with two intransigent individuals or factions, each of which wants to wipe the other one off the face of the map of the world, right? So leadership is critical in those places. And I don't know who the next leader of Israel will be. The Palestinians, it's very confusing because people have been killed during these battles, and I don't know who will emerge from that. But that is where we have to head.
You say that the Biden administration has tried hard to bring peace to this situation, but did it try hard enough? And is the incoming Trump administration expected to do any better? Because this situation obviously has resulted in so many deaths and so many civilian deaths.
Well, what concerns me about, first of all, in terms of the Biden administration, only history can tell us. We're living through this very difficult period where no one really has an answer. And for the future, you have to, from this chaos, you have to find leaders who are capable of coming together. Look, the Congress of the United States can't even come together 3/4 of the time now. But there, the hostilities are so ancient and they persisted for so long, it's really hard to, I can't identify who their leader should be, but I know both sides need a leader that can come and negotiate around a table, maybe involving the Jordanian leaders, the Lebanese. I don't think right now Iran is going to be helpful in this. I think Turkey can be a constructive partner. Yes, some of the European nations and the United States can participate, but regionally, they have to come together. Regionally, there has to be some set of visionary people that are willing to negotiate. One idea I had, which nobody likes, or at least they haven't said they want to use it, but years ago at Notre Dame University, each of us says, what can we offer from this part of the country that we live in? There was a president of Notre Dame University, Father, and then I think it was Monsignor, Theodore Hesburgh. He was a genius. He was a genius. He created the Kroc Center for Peace. The wife of the McDonald's founder donated money. And one of the things the Kroc Center for Peace has done globally is purchased property in the West Bank near Bethlehem. And they created a prayer center called Tantur. And I have visited there many times. And I thought, what a place to negotiate peace. Because any confession can go there. You cannot bring a weapon on site. And I thought, why can't a Midwestern institution like that lead an effort to dialogue? Because it'll only start with dialogue. You can't have any weapons, and I'm sure the free world could protect that. But you have to get people together. And the question would be, who within the Palestinian interests, who could be the negotiator or negotiators? For Israel, I think the United States has to put some pressure on. in order to get people around the table who are willing to negotiate. We can't negotiate for them. They have to do it. And right now, the feelings are so raw. I do believe that the religious leaders of the world can play a role in this. I really do. Because that is a center for religion of all the major denominations. They root there. And one factor that really threw a wrench into the works, I'll say this, I'm not the only one that said this, but when President Donald Trump in his first term moved the capital of Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, it infinitely complicated the situation. So I can't make the decisions for the folks that live there, but somehow you have to create a safe zone that people can go and they can try to negotiate just in that area of where the negotiation would occur. There are 17 Christian denominations, and they don't all say the same prayer. That is a part of the world where religion and religious views predominate. In our country, we allow the free exercise of religion, but we do not mandate it. Nor are we a singular country in terms of faith. There are people who have all kinds of faith, what would I call it, confessions, all kinds of affiliations, but it's not mandated. In those countries, when you travel there, there's a very strong predisposition to the power given to a given religion. So, for example, if you go to Lebanon, the president of Lebanon must be a Maronite Christian. The speaker of their house has to be a Sunni Muslim. Now, what happens if you're a Roman Catholic, like I am? You can't run for that. We don't even understand that in our country. Just to even think about how people live with that every day. That's why we need leadership from that part of the world to help to bring together these disparate interests with help from other countries around the world. But in the end, they have to decide their own borders. They have to decide what kind of governments they want. And I think we have an opportunity for that. I think there will be cases heard at the World Court now because of the loss of lives, which is so tragic, so unnecessary. But bad leaders cause people to be killed. And leaders have to be elected that are aspirational for all the people there. And only they can do it.
And this isn't the only conflict that the U.S. is currently having to be involved in. I would say Ukraine obviously more so involved directly in sending support and aid. What would you have to say in terms of solving this situation? Because we've seen that the president-elect, he's pretty convinced that this is going to be something that's easy to do. But obviously for the Biden administration, it hasn't been easy to bring an end to this conflict. And now we're going into another administration for this.
We have 400,000 Americans who are buried across that continent. After World War II, when NATO was established, and the United Nations actually, a little bit before that, was formed, we as a world decided we didn't like war. That was smart. In the Ukraine situation, it's different than the Middle East. Our ties to the Middle East historically related more to their ability to send us oil. Now we are energy independent at home at the moment. We could lose that edge if we don't keep the focus on energy independence here in the United States and keep working toward that. But for Europe, our very democratic values of setting up a republic, we learned that from France. All of our efforts to free Europe from repression, billions and billions of dollars and millions of human lives were dedicated to that purpose across all of those countries. So in 1989, after hundreds of years of repression, the Soviet Union fell, beginning in Poland, 1989. Then in 1991, the rest of the Soviet Union fell. I believe President Jimmy Carter put the pieces in place for the fall of communism when he was president of the United States, and his national security advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, he was brilliant. And about 8 years later, it just fell, starting in Poland. And there was a whole set of activities that occurred that I can't get into now, but the labor unions joined with the people. They demonstrated peacefully, and they ultimately brought down the Soviet Union first in Poland, and then it spread across the region. As you moved eastward, those people haven't known freedom in modern history. And so Ukraine, for 30 years, began to rebuild her country. You could see it. I traveled there more than any other member of Congress. I've seen it. I saw what it was like in 1973 when I traveled privately, and then as a member of Congress representing my country. The people were so hopeful. Poorest nation in Europe, but the most important agricultural land in the world. They have many other assets, but their people want to be free. And they are sitting right up against Russia. They are the buffer between NATO and Russia. So what Putin did starting in 2014, his first invasion, and then he expanded it, moving fully into the country. Ukraine being able to be a free country is in the national interest of our country, because if she falls, the very idea of democracy in Europe begins to be subscribed. And the nations that are next to it, smaller nations like Lithuania, Latvia, Poland, Hungary, Romania, Moldova, there's so many other countries that are working for their own liberty. And the line begins then to kind of move east. And so Ukraine is a real test of our own commitment to the North Atlantic Treaty Organization and to everything that those who in the 20th century bequeathed liberty to us, what they fought for. And you can feel it when you meet with the Europeans. They are very aware of what, if Ukraine doesn't win, what can happen next. And we can see Russia prowling around here in our hemisphere, up in the Arctic, because the Arctic is thawing out now. I don't think that's the best thing. But China and Russia are very active north of North America. They're already doing things that are very, very predatory. And but we have our eyes on them. And we have the ability to encircle the globe and to be active, if we have to defend ourselves. But the Ukraine situation is different than the Middle East, because it is a political come to Jesus. The Middle East is more economic, it's historic relationships, but for Ukraine, it goes to the very fiber of what it means to live in a free world. And so we have, as a member of the Defense Committee, I've supported Ukraine, and I believe that they are fighting for the future of the largest landmass in Europe, that they will properly manage and benefit the entire world. So I hope that we can, I hope President Trump is able to bring it to a respectable closure. I don't know who he will appoint as his ambassador. I've watched several ambassadors now who were unable to reach accommodation with Russia. And we know that on the Russian front, because of what happened to them during World War II, there has to be a very clear definition of where the boundary is. And I think Russia's fighting for her own purposes as well. She doesn't want the West, to encroach on her, but she actually fired the first shot. So in this war, and we need to push her back inside her boundaries.
But we're seeing here in the United States a resurgence of those isolationist views. And the United States has been here before. I mean, there have been individuals who have called for less U.S. involvement. So now that we're getting back into a situation where isolationism is becoming more mainstream, what role for you on that committee is going to be crucial? Because I know there are definitely some of your colleagues who are not exactly in favor of that.
Well, right now, anytime we take a vote in Congress in terms of Europe, we probably have, out of 435 members, 325 to 350 votes. So it's pretty clear that the vast majority of members support this. The question is, what will the leadership do in allowing us to have free votes? And by that I mean, don't threaten a member because they want to help a European country. And we've had really good leadership, and I'm hoping that that will continue. So I'm pretty optimistic.
Well, we'll be following, because it's going to definitely be a lot of the same in terms of the geopolitics. I mean, administrations change, but geopolitical situations, they tend to sometimes be a little bit stagnant. Congresswoman Kaptur, thank you for your time.
Thank you for your time. Very proud of you.
Thank you
so much.